Global Conservation Corps presents the RHINO Man podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of RHINO Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Theresa Sowry. Theresa is the CEO of the Southern African Wildlife College, which equips people with the necessary knowledge and applied skills to conserve and protect Africa's natural resources and biodiversity in viable, inclusive, and economically successful ways. Theresa holds a Master of Science degree in Botany. She gained conservation experience while employed by South African national parks, working on their rare antelope program in the Kruger National Park. And she is a pilot flying a Savannah S light sport aircraft. In this conversation, we talk about Theresa's family visits to Kruger National Park in her youth and how those fostered her love of nature. We talk about her path to working at the Wildlife College, the beauty of the location and people, and the many programs offered, from field ranger training, the canine unit, and aerial support, to community and youth development and responsible resource management. We talk about the changes that took place because of the rhino poaching crisis, the complexities and nuances of conservation, and Theresa's love of flying. Such a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation. Before we jump in, I'd like to ask you to please subscribe to and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform, and to share it on social media and with your friends. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Theresa Sowry. Welcome to the RHINO Man podcast, Theresa. It's a real honor to have you on here. I feel like this has been a long time coming, so this is going to be an exciting one.
Thanks, John. Absolute privilege to be on a podcast. So excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, and I feel like you and the Wildlife College have played such a huge role in this project that we've been working on for, I think it's close to 7 years now, RHINO Man, between the film and so many other things that have happened in between. So just want to thank you at the start for all of your support and the team at the Wildlife College, and it's just been so amazing to get to know you guys and to spend so much time out there. Such a beautiful place.
No, thanks for that. But honestly, the 7 years have flown by. Meeting Matt so many years ago, and with his enthusiasm and introductions to you, and it seems to have definitely morphed and come through different shapes and forms, but it's an absolute wonderful documentary in the end, which I think captures the highlights and the lowlights of so many aspects of our day-to-day world.
Yeah, thank you for that. And let's start out with you just giving us a little short teaser of what the Wildlife College is and what your role is there currently, and then a little later on we'll kind of dive in deep into all those parts.
So the Southern African Wildlife College is an institution that I believe works with conservation organizations in order to improve skills needed to manage our wildlife areas across our continent and actually further abroad these days in a more sustainable, holistic fashion. The Wildlife College was established in 1996 with our first students coming through in 1997. We've trained over 20,000 students to date. But I think more importantly, we've trained from 56 different countries. And I really think as an institution that is applied hands-on and making a difference in skills development, we really do offer the broad range of training. We're not specialists in anything we do. We're generalists. We try and get people to think broadly about conservation and make the right decisions, whether you're a field ranger or a CEO of a company. So dynamic place to work. Absolutely love working there, love the staff. We are always moving. We have very little red tape holding us back. And luckily I have a management team and staff at the college that really do commit 100% to every single product, which is our students passing through, and a dynamic board that's representative of different aspects of conservation. So I think it gives us a nice holistic overview and guidance, which is what you're looking in the board structure.
Absolutely. And even though most of my experience there is with the ranger training and teams there, even within just that one specific program, you realize how holistic the education is, because they're not being just trained in security or just trained in conservation, it's even things like personal finances, just so that they can better manage their lives and support themselves as they're growing within the conservation space. So it's just, yeah, such a wonderful place to be, and amazing programs to get a little peek into.
So thanks for that, John. I think the most important thing for us is that all the training, we try and look at it from multi-dimensions. And take a field ranger, for example. We need to, first of all, every person needs to understand in some way or another they lead at different stages of their lives. So all because they may not be in a leadership role in their organization, they go home and they're a leader at night within their family maybe. So, how do you train somebody to understand their own values, their own belief system, their own understanding, so that they're not in conflict with that in any decision making that they may make within their organization or within their family. So holistic training, anything from leadership to financial management to the social impact of what you do every day on other people, the environmental impact, it has to all be trained in all its different facets in every course that you do in some way.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dive into some of the training that you're doing in a little more specifics, but want to focus on your story for a bit. Maybe before we dive back into how you got into all this, what's some of your day-to-day right now in your position?
It's a bit complicated at the moment. So I am married to a game ranger in the Kruger National Park, and we were stationed at Kingfisherspruit, which is just at the open gate of Kruger Park for going on 20 years. So I started at the Wildlife College just after I finished my master's degree with Wits University, and I'll never forget my husband saying, well, you don't have to work, my ranger's salary will look after both of us. And after about 3 weeks of marriage at Kingfisherspruit, he said to me, oh, for heaven's sake, please go out and find a job. We're both going to drive each other crazy. Luckily for me, the Wildlife College was just next door to Auckland Gate. I was lucky enough to start there. Funny enough, my first job at the college was within the community department. And I had been trained in an old school conservation way of understanding in those days, 25 years ago, of conservation training in South Africa, which was, sadly very linear compared to the holistic approach we understand today. So the fortress approach was what we all learned. And working at the college absolutely freaked me out with understanding I had to go in and work with communities every day. I had never done this before. But it was the most liberating thing liberating task I've ever had to do. Absolutely out of my comfort zone, but definitely hearing the people's voices, hearing the community's voice, living around a park, but never having set foot in the park, understanding why benefits to the communities are so important in order for the success of any wildlife area to be maintained. So, yeah, eye-opener, and I actually thank God every day that was the start of my career at the college, because without a human approach to conservation is not going to succeed. And I really learned that the hard way. And yeah, at the moment, firm believer, if you take people out of conservation, there's definitely no future for conservation. So yes, I think I changed my job 6 times at the college in probably 10 years. And I'm currently the CEO of the Wildlife College. And people say, well, how have you been there for 20 years? And the truth is, it's dynamic, it changes, it responds to the needs of the industry, it keeps people excited. I find out from my husband what the real needs in a national park is or in a wildlife area. And the college designs programs to address those needs. So it's having a real life person identifying needs, on the ground needs all the time. So I think it really does assist us in understanding the challenges. I'm an avid pilot, bush pilot, absolutely love doing it. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, I learned to fly a light sports aircraft. Met a friend of mine, Bruce McDonald, one day in the parking lot, Spa in Hoedspruit, and realized we had a mutual friend that he taught to fly. I thought, well, if she can do it, Chrissy Clark, if you're listening, I can do it. And the next minute I enrolled, much to my husband's absolute detriment. He was devastated. But no, it's a real passion. I've always wanted to do it. And that's how now I balance my life, spending many hours in the freedom of the sky, monitoring RHINO and different other environmental conditions that we're trying to assess from the air. And do it for passion and for work, an absolute love. And if anybody wants to, they need to learn to fly. It's the most amazing thing to do.
Yeah, I've taken some pilot lessons in my teens and I just never made it all the way through. And I kind of regret that. So I feel like one of these days I'm going to get back up in the sky because it's a special place for sure.
No, absolutely, you must. And then finally, we moved after 20 years at Kingfisher Spray to Porphyry. So my husband's now the game ranger of the Porphyry section in Kruger, the most magical part of probably South Africa. Very happy to be here, but now I have to really play the balancing act of trying to manage an institution remotely for a certain period of the month, but still spending a huge amount of my time down physically at the college. But I have an amazing team and everything's going really well.
Yeah, it sounds like a very diverse set of things that you're doing throughout the month between the flying and being at the college, doing it remotely. Yeah, there's so much I really want to dive into that you just said, but let's go way back. Like, where did you grow up? Was there a connection to conservation early on? How did you kind of find your path that led you to the college?
So I was very privileged to grow up not privileged to grow up in Johannesburg, but privileged to grow up in a family that absolutely loved visiting the Kruger National Park once a year. So yeah, born in Johannesburg, and I'll never forget my mom always telling me the nice personality of her third child, which was me, only came out once a year on our visits to the Kruger National Park. So I knew from a very young age where I wanted to be, and it was definitely in wilderness areas. But I had parents that supported me in every single way, put me through Wits University, did my honours and masters through Wits, but was really luckily enough to work with Kevin Rogers and get honours and masters programs in the Kruger Park. So I did all of my practical post-grad training in the Kruger on the rare antelope and zebra program on the Northern Plains. Worked very closely with Dani Pienaar, who's still a senior member of staff in Kruger. And yeah, met my husband while I was working in the park. He was also a master's student on fire burning blocks and never ever returned to Joburg. So that's how I found myself here. But no, just had a family that was extremely supportive. Yeah, if I have to thank anybody for where I am today, it's my mom and my dad.
Yeah, it sounds like a great way to grow up and get that sense of wildlife on those trips. Do you remember any of those early trips? Like what you were most drawn to in terms of the wildlife or just the experience overall? What hooked you?
Sure. It hooked me as Satara Camp. I was one of those avid Big Five kids that grew up just absolutely loving seeing, everything big and furry. And I'll never forget the smell of the old camps, that absolute, I think people that are listening that remember the smell of the huts, that just got me. I knew I had arrived home. If that, you were in the camps, you just couldn't get enough of it. You just wanted to wake up and still in the dark and be the first in the queue, leaving every single morning in the dark in order to go and find what normally return on investment was a pride of lion. So for me, it was, sadly, my husband will hate hearing this, but it was the Big Five. I was an absolute, loved coming to see them. And as you mature, I think, within as an environmentalist, you move away from Big Five and start to actually understand the ecology behind everything and the absolute wilderness factor of places you go. And but my family, unfortunately, never matured or progressed. We were all, always definitely central and southern Kruger National Park visitors. But my husband and I have always enjoyed moving a lot further north for the tranquility and just the absolute love of the bush.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are pretty focused on Big Five, and then you find some birding friends or someone that's really interested in some, the smaller species, and all of a sudden you become addicted to seeking out all of those other little animals and experiences. So you kind of mentioned how you got connected to the Wildlife College. Can you talk about what that place is like for someone that's never been there? What's the setting and what's it like being at the Wildlife College?
So I always say that if I was a young student entering, or leaving school, it would be my perfect campus for somebody that wants to be in the bush and absolutely have nature absorb you and every single moment of your learning career. That's the Wildlife College. A lot of people say we're South Africa's best kept secret, and it's so true. You pass the gate of the college on the way to the open gate of Kruger, And it's so understated. It just says the Southern African Wildlife College. But, you drive about 2 kilometers to our main campus, and there is a campus that accommodates 164 people. Actually, we're a little bit over that at the moment with the additional tents. And there's an institution in the middle of the bush, which is great connectivity, great learning environment. Every practical that you do is out in Big 5 game area, open to Kruger National Park. Everything is applied. So, if you're going to learn to be a field ranger, you learn by doing patrols. It's the crazy environment, is that you are absolutely immersed in real life situations that get under your skin. We've got top-notch academic staff that are living on site or living around the Hoedspruit area. We've got great technology. So ultimately, to me, coming to the Wildlife College is just a place where it just makes sense. If this is where you want to learn from an environmental point of view, access to people, access to donors, access to decision makers, we really do. We are boiling pot in a way for everything conservation.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people are just passing through at different times too. So if you're there, you're meeting people from all over the world that are involved in conservation in different ways. And like you said, you're driving from the gate to the campus, and you might, bounce into a herd of elephant that's passing through, or, whatever. You're just part of Kruger, right? If I'm correct, it's actually in Kruger Park.
Yeah, so it's a contractual national park, Kempiana, and it's owned essentially by WWF, left to Sandparks Trust. So Sandparks manage it. It's not open to the public. You can't go. So Ngala is the main concession, or the only concession actually on the property. And then we have access to a certain area for our training. What I also didn't mention is that the main campus is great. It's highly academic and great access to whatever you need to learn. But we've literally got a field ranger base that's now a couple of kilometers away from the main camp. And that's where we train our field rangers. And so that's very low key. It's definitely not, the connectivity and the infrastructure of the main campus. So we train field rangers under field ranger working conditions. So once again, very applied learning. And that base, we can train up to 100 people at any one stage. And then just next to that is our canine unit, where we train in the free tracking hounds. And again, it's something that we test in for conservation. A few years ago, we started it for a proof of concept. And now it's an extremely successful part of a toolkit that's really having a big impact on the percentage of successful follow-ups, specifically in Kruger Park and the rest of GCAP. So our trainer goes out across the continent at this stage, training a number of other dog packs in a number of other countries. So definitely highly successful. And that's what the college does. Because we donor funded, or we have the ability to raise donor funds, we try and test new technologies or old technologies in a new way and inform conservationists about what works and what doesn't work. It's so that nobody has to go and invest good money after bad in a way. So great to have that ability. I know Johan van Straden, our dog canine master, he loves the fact that it doesn't have to be pressure on him. He can test new things. And if it doesn't work, he says, okay, well, that breed doesn't work, or this regime doesn't work for the dogs, without feeling that every time you make a mistake, it's something that you can't sell. It's just something that we don't form. And then we've got obviously our aerial wing as well. So we've also got a hangar and a landing strip at the college, where we definitely operate and assist Sandparks with RHINO monitoring and a lot of other follow-ups from a aerial wing perspective. But in addition, we train from the Hoedspruit base a number of bush pilots for wildlife areas. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to be a pilot in order to fly for conservation. You can be just a normal person like myself that decides to become a light sports aircraft pilot and train on type. So you don't spend huge amounts of money and time training on big, expensive planes, so that you can actually afford to get many, many hours on the smaller planes, but become good at what you're doing in the bush, because it's all low and slow flying.
And there's a lot of opportunities too, from that perspective of, being able to do volunteer hours to help out.
You mean from the flying perspective?
Yeah, from the flying perspective, yeah.
So it's actually not true, and it depends on the situation. So, and also the agreement that people have with different organizations. So the Wildlife College, we only would allow people to fly the planes who have commercial ratings or the equivalent of an instructor's rating. And it all, it's really just to minimize risks. I'm sure you're correct in other areas, but we don't have any volunteer pilots for the college. But I'm not saying that doesn't happen in other conservation areas.
Gotcha.
I'm sure. Like the Battaliers, for example, that's an amazing group of people. Many of them have many, many, many hours, and they volunteer their services to a number of conservation organizations.
Probably who I was thinking of, actually, the Battaliers. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a beautiful place there, and I've spent so much time. I just feel extremely fortunate because, like you said, it's this kind of gem that a lot of people might not realize is there. And, I've got to spend nights capturing sleep deprivations with the rangers and, going out in the bush with them on their bush patrol. And it's just, it's so beautiful and so special. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how things have evolved since you've been there, and maybe we can take it from this angle too. I don't know if there were any changes because of the rhino poaching crisis, but I always like getting people's perspective on what that was like when it started to happen for you and how you noticed it, and then did that change what the college was doing or their approach during that time?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question, and that's exactly why we've had a dedicated field ranger base built, as well as the aerial wing, as well as the canine unit. That was all in response to the rhino poaching crisis. So that's all happened in the last 7, 8 years. So we most definitely were established all those many years ago to train natural resource protection or natural resource managers, and definitely not field operations staff at the ranger level. So our institution was focused more on that academic level, filling in the holes in a way of people that were already employed in decision-making positions, but maybe didn't have the relevant skills. So the organizations would send them back to the college, and industry helped us design programs that would fill the gaps of people that were already in the employ of conservation organizations across the SADC region. So that was, and we ran long courses and short courses. We didn't really work with communities. We definitely didn't work with school leavers. It was all employed staff, or it was targeted skills development. Then what happened when we had to diversify, we had to become sustainable. In those days, WWF and Peace Box Foundation were our major donors. Hans Huizen Charitable Trust as well always gave good lumps of financial support to us. But ultimately, there comes a time in any NGO's life where people say, well, it's enough giving, you've got to start earning your own keep. And, at the time, everybody's very scared and says, why the change? But it's a healthy change. It's what every organization has to go through. So even at that stage, which was prior to the rhino poaching crisis, we started to diversify. We started working with bridging program students, trying to understand how to make a link between our local schools and entry into the college, trying to work closer with our communities so that they would see the college as an asset. And funny enough, that's how I actually met Matt. He was a bridging course student many, many years ago. So ultimately, that started to diversify our products. And then the rhino poaching started to take off in a major way. And Kruger National Park, or Sandpark, started discussing with the college, how can we all start working together and getting top quality field rangers trained. And even, the likes of our Department of Environmental Affairs, pressure was put on them to try and train more and more students. So we tendered for a lot of field ranger contracts. We used to work with African Field Ranger Training Services, so Martin Tembu and Ruben de Kock and Marianne. And ultimately, at one stage, they decided to sell, and the college bought their business so that we had the capacity to institutionalize field ranger training at the college. And that all was at the time where rhino poaching really did start to get out of control. So we built the field ranger base, and then very quickly, Sandparks asked us to investigate this pre-tracking hounds, which was a project my husband started in the park, but ultimately the capacity to test it needed to be held by an institution, not by an individual. He had gotten a lot of positive results, but the project got larger than him, and the college took it over. But again, it's an amazing time, many balls in the air. The college is adaptive and flexible, and we get requests all the time to please help us where you can. At the same time, with the pressure of the poaching, I decided, I'm going to go and learn to fly, because this is going to balance my life while my husband's out working so much. And all of a sudden you realized how flying also now could have been a positive aspect or tool in the toolbox. So the college then started to invest in section rangers being trained in aerial light sport aircraft training, because essentially a light sport aircraft is the same price as a car. So all of a sudden the aerial surveillance and coverage was so much higher if they were able to have that asset. So we started seeing that this whole approach to the field ranger training as a result of the intense poaching looked like it was starting to take on a 4-tiered approach. And we always say that that's what the college does. We need to ensure there's good training, good boots on the ground. We need to ensure you've got your canine assets. You need to ensure that you've got aerial surveillance, knowing where your high-valued species are. And then you need to ensure that you have a bridge with the community, and there's community beneficiation happening around this wildlife economy, essentially, that was happening around the rhino poaching. So how do you ensure jobs are created? How do you ensure animals are worth more alive dead than at the end of the day? So our field ranger program started to have all of those facets that you spoke about earlier, to make sure that it's an all-rounded person and not just military skills that we're training the field rangers. So yeah, the college took on a huge slant and investment then into the field ranger base. And at that stage, in the heart of the rhino poaching, we were training about 600 or 700 field rangers a year, and all were going into employment.
Yeah, it's really impressive. What was it like for you personally as you started to see this poaching happen? Do you recall, I don't know if there were rhinos being poached near the campus, what was that like when everyone realized that this is going to be a serious problem that we're going to have to tackle?
Yeah, so I think this is just the good and the bad of the Wildlife College, is that we, within the national park, it wasn't just my husband coming home every night and telling me about the horrific things that he had seen. There were days where, his rangers had to respond to rhino that were poached, sadly, within a kilometre of our college campus. So yes, definitely everybody felt it, everybody saw it, everybody lived it. But at the end of the day, those poached animals could have been coming from our local community. Those poached animals may have been poached by people that our community, our own staff members knew or didn't know. So it's a people's problem. And, we didn't just count numbers of rhino carcasses. We were counting numbers of families that were being completely devastated by the poaching. It's not just the animal, it's families that are falling apart because of, obviously, all the major social factors that are going on with it. And that's I think, where we would be having these community meetings. It's not about the rhino, it's about the people around the rhino. What effect is it happening? I'll never forget a meeting where we sat with the community, and a question was asked to an old lady in the community sitting next to me. What is the thing that she values the most in the community? So what is the one thing? I thought she was going to ask for food or water, and she asked for safety. So at the end of the day, it was such a wake-up call to me. So people in the local communities throughout this whole rhino poaching issue they don't feel safe. They don't know, one neighbor from the next. They don't trust each other. So it's a breakdown of a whole social system that we used to sit around and discuss in our lectures and hear from our students and gather that information that is just so much broader than protecting an individual rhino. So yeah, I think this is where we've got to look at the human factor around these issues and not just the rhino factor. And nothing can be more specifically stating this than the Antoine story, that it's families, whether you're on the poaching side or the protection side, I mean, it's a breakdown of the social structures within the communities that everybody had to deal with. So yes, the college saw the rhino carcasses, but they also were very affected, and still are, by the breakdown of social systems.
Yeah, I don't know if you can go into more detail about that too. For people that aren't from South Africa that might be listening to this, you kind of mentioned that your first job at the college had a lot to do with going out into the communities and connecting. I don't know if you can try and give a little bit of the lay of the land of what the situation's like in terms of communities and opportunities and things like that, and then how the college has shifted into community and youth development and making sure that people that are living next to these protected areas are benefiting in different ways and participating.
Yeah, so that's, when I talk about a fortress approach, I think a lot of South Africans that were educated in the 90s and before understand what I'm saying. It was all about conservation, was essentially preservation. Conservation it was a simple issue. That's how we were trained. It wasn't a complex issue. And today we realize that conservation involves people. So when I started my job and my first, trip into Belvedere Village, I thought, oh my goodness, like how out of place am I? I'm working at the Wildlife College and now I'm visiting, the local community and seeing what they need. They were asking us for water, and I'll never forget, we got them those water rollers. And it struck me because people living just next to the park, and the park is known to be like a white man's paradise, they still don't even have access to water, and that's all that they were asking for. And then, the college and some other places helped draw water for the community and giving them just the basics that they were hoping to get from the conservation sector. And ultimately, this is just it. It's that equation of people need to live, and absolutely, there's definitely challenges and elements of overpopulation and those sorts of things that we're not going to go into. But they're there, they're alive, they need to survive. They're on the outskirts of Kruger. Kruger is fenced and seems to have more animals and water than anybody could ever dream of having. So how do you start educating communities to understand the value of wildlife, okay, to benefit from wildlife, and for conservationists to understand that without involving the communities, conservation is not going to succeed. Stop at the fortress approach. Let's find out from the communities, what are their needs? How can we hopefully be able to beneficiate in one way or another under obviously very governed systems so that they protect the area by maybe not poaching as much, because now they've got maybe meat being delivered in meat drop, as some places do. And what is the governance system that would help that actually continue to operate? So we as an institution, we can't do anything more than our mandate, which is education. We're conservation education. So we have a program now, Education for Sustainable Development, that is headed by our RISE team, which is the Rural Initiative for a Sustainable Environment. And it's really working with intergenerational learning from any age in the community, a number of role players, GCC being one of them, the PACE project from Tusk being another, Timbabati Foundation. So there's a number of role players. So we look at a landscape approach. How do we start working with the community in order to design a pipeline of education opportunities within our community that would ultimately start at junior school or even preschool children and take them into further and higher education opportunities and then job opportunities. One thing we're really looking at here is this responsible resource use, which is really all about responsible decision making. And we've been training this at a high level. Well, when I say high level, at a post-matric level, you can say. But we're trying now to bring it into school curriculum. And Theresa Sowry, she's going to actually be testing it. Well, she's testing it in Zimbabwe at the moment and working with the college. Because how do we start to get kids making the correct decision, the responsible decision about resource use at a very, very young age? You get what I'm saying? It shouldn't be theirs or ours or hunting or not hunting. It should be, what is your responsible decision-making process in order to keep wildlife areas wild, but still to address the needs of the human being? And is it financially sustainable? Is it environmentally sustainable and is it socially sustainable? And if we're able to put that curriculum into kids' school curriculum and help them make educated decisions in a responsible way when they're young, I think we're going to be changing a lot of minds as the generations get older. I don't know if I answered your question there. I went on a bit of a tangent, but it's a complex issue. So that's how we've changed our programs, and we've got a department now that specifically deals with the social elements of conservation, our people.
I mean, I feel like we need a Southern African wildlife college everywhere, really. I mean, this is something that youth should be learning everywhere in the world, because I think it's something lacking in our education system and how we manage our resources, how what we do is connected to our surroundings and environment, wherever that is on the planet.
Well, John, I think that's the whole issue. People have become disconnected. And, I'm going to bastardize some of the things my husband says now, but this is just the truth. People, they don't realize they're eating meat, that the meat is coming from a cow. They are so disconnected from death, yet they'll point fingers at, African people that are trying to keep alive and are wanting to maybe hunt some of their animals legally, officially. What is so wrong with that? At the end of the day, if things are done sustainably, ethically, responsibly, we shouldn't be condemning anybody. We should be looking at what is the most responsible thing to do. Sometimes it's hunting, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's ecotourism, sometimes it's not. What is the impact on the environment? Is it sustainable? How many jobs? Is it viable? It's all these questions. It shouldn't be a yes or no answer ever. It should be discuss the situation in light of the context and see what's the best solution given those conditions.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for people that are just sitting on social media, maybe on the other side of the planet, to judge or say what they think is the right way without really knowing. What would you say to folks that are, maybe they're concerned or interested in what's going on in conservation in South Africa or anywhere in the world? What would you tell them in terms of how to, best connect or react to those situations where it's not this reactive lashing out at things that they don't understand? I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what you would tell that person.
So again, I'm going to say something my husband says, because it does make me think, and it's all about, he says we are all miners, we are all hunters, and we are all farmers by proxy. Okay, so you may not be a hunter or a farmer or a miner, but look at your lifestyle, and every single one of us is every single one, or all three of those things by proxy. So just because we may not do it because we're employed to do it, or we want to do it, or we like to do it, we still consume it. We still utilize it in one way or another. And that's the advice that I want to give everybody, that I think a lot of us these days are trying to say to everybody, don't be so judgmental, okay? Let's just try to bring all of the rational thought processes to one table. Let's be rational about how we deal with complex conservation and environmental challenges. Let's not finger point. Let's understand the rationality behind the decisions. And if you can defend your position based on a decision-making framework that shows it's the most responsible thing to do, go for it. Let's not judge, but let's not finger point, because you don't know enough about the situation. And yes, you do get what we call the lunatic fringes on both sides of the spectrum. And sadly, we'll always have those lunatic fringes. But when those lunatic fringes are the ones on social media, that's where they're dangerous, because they're not rational. And we just need to, the 99% of people that live in this world, we need to be rational, and we need to all understand by proxy, we are those three types of industries, whether we like it or not, we are.
It's super interesting. I mean, you think of just our phones or our computers. I mean, all of that has been mined from somewhere. And sadly, a lot of some of the special components within it are mined in places that people aren't treated very well. So it's always something to remember. And I think, too, just coming into any space, you always have to be aware that it's more complex and nuanced than it looks from the outside. I mean, me just coming into this world from the filmmaking side, I learned so much. At first you're just like, oh, there's rhinos being poached, there's good guys, bad guys, but then quickly, if you're open and listening and on the ground, you realize that, wow, this is a hugely complex problem. It's geopolitical in nature. It's opportunities, and there's the social side to it, and a lot of the things that you guys are addressing through the college. And it's so hard to point a finger, because you realize that a lot of people doing things that you might consider bad are in a position that if you were in that position, you'd probably be doing the same thing. So yeah, just come to anything like this with that openness and willingness to learn before you start yelling and screaming and judging.
And I'm privileged enough now to live in Pafuri, where we work very closely with the Makulek community. And I really think maybe you should interview one of them for a podcast and actually hear from the community the benefits that they actually getting from conservation these days, because that's where it's all going to boil down to. I mean, these are people that got their land back. They're now in joint management agreements with the Kruger National Park. They are 20 years down the line, absolutely, but there are benefits, and there's definitely success stories there. And you've got people that are most definitely, they're going to head conservation in a good few years. They are the success stories that we want to listen to. We need to understand it's not a them and us. It's a case of how do we set up systems where people can really benefit from conservation in order to keep their land under conservation. How do we ensure wildlife areas remain wild? If you take the wild out of wildlife, you've got nothing. You can't, you can have captive bred animals, absolutely. Is it responsible? In my mind, absolutely not. What's the point? We've got to look after our land. The animals will come back, okay? It's making sure wildlife is kept wild and that land doesn't go into any other industry, farming or mining. So what's the benefit to the people? And if you really engage with the Makuleks, they have challenges. But I love sitting and discussing with them, because 20 years down the line, they still have this absolute connection with their land. The land that they were removed from, which has been given back, they still now an active part of how it's managed. And I love that story. So I really suggest everybody listens to it. And then how can you take the voice away from the Makuleks? How can you tell them how to manage or not how to manage their land? Those armchair conservationists you were talking about, they don't have any skin in the game. They sit with a community that has all their skin in the game, and yet they've agreed to keep it under conservation because the benefits they do believe will be sustainable. So, but if they want an elephant or two, why can't they have it? There's enough elephants to go around in that area. And, if you don't come to some sort of agreement, you're going to lose the land. And then what? It's going to go to mining, and it's going to go to agriculture, and conservation will be lost. So, yeah, those people need to learn more from real inclusive, holistic conservation people rather than social media. Don't believe a word you hear on social media.
Yeah, I think skin in the game is a great way to judge whether or not to give someone some energy in your mind when you're thinking about a situation, because if you don't have any, then you're probably not connected in a way that actually gives you the right knowledge or understanding to be able to talk about it. But I'm curious, you've been at the Wildlife College for a long time. I'm sure you've got tons of these stories, but can you talk about any stories that stick out of people that you've seen go through, could be any program at the Wildlife College, that you've just seen develop and change in an amazing way? I mean, I'm sure there's endless stories, but I don't know if there's something that stands out, because even just from the watching a ranger selection and maybe a 6-week course, seeing that transformation is pretty incredible. And oftentimes a lot of people that maybe this is their first job and first time really getting to test themselves, and you see them take ownership of so many aspects of their life, and that just, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but you can see that change in someone for the better.
So, sometimes it's not even what we see, it's what we read in feedbacks from what the students have to, write feedback stories or just thank you letters that we get every now and then. And then you realize it's not your perspective of what you've seen, it's actually their words. And And there's a gentleman, I hope he doesn't mind me calling his name, but Wilson Suela, who's a section ranger in the Kruger National Park. But he underwent training at the college. And we asked him to please write to his sponsors just to, tell them what the learning at the college meant to him. And he wrote them this poem that said that, he said that the college is the roots of the tree, okay? And he is just merely the fruit. So the training grew the tree, and he ultimately is now the fruit of everybody's labor. And I thought that was the most eloquent way of putting it. And if that's what our students are thinking about the college, we must be doing something right. I go to Vic Falls the other day, and, as I enter Vic Falls, I just hear my name, Mrs. Sowry. And I can look around, and there's like one of my old students, Beatrice, who's now the manager of the Vic Falls National Park. So no matter where you go, I've always taken caps that I hand out to the past students, because you can't walk into any wildlife area across Africa without somebody recognizing you and being a past student and telling you their story. So it's those stories, you've changed people's lives. You see they're being promoted. At one stage, we did a poll, and 80% of our higher education students were promoted when they got back to their workplaces. I mean, that's unbelievable. And that's progression within conservation organizations across SADC. One of our students wrote to Jean-A Poltny, our fundraising and marketing executive, saying that for the first time after training at the college, he was able to buy his granny a present, and this made him feel like a man because he was earning a salary. It's little things like this that you don't really realize the small impacts that you're making, because yes, you see the big impacts. You see the change in the selection and the sleep deprivation and the team spirit and the leadership that happens in front of you. But what you don't see, and what it's awesome to hear from the students directly, is their inner belief and understanding of how they've changed at the college. And just today, I was actually having an interview with the new SRC, and I did it virtually, and I got each one of them, because they're all at the college, to introduce themselves to me. And two of the SRC are actually, one is a past staff member of the college, and one is a past student of the college that's now come onto our higher level programs. And both of them are just, when I said, okay, tell me something about yourself, and both of them said, well, they've come back home. They're so excited to be coming back home because this college is their home. And then they went on to say what had happened to them since leaving the college and why, and because of what the college unlocked for them. So, I mean, you don't expect it, but everybody relates everything back to their time at the college, which I find it's little things. It's not the big things. Even myself, I mean, again, my husband laughs because we sent the entire management team on a leadership program a couple of years ago, where I'd never been on a leadership program. I was a leader by default, not design. And this leadership program really made us understand, a personal mastery process that we all embarked on, and understanding your own personal values and your own personal mission statement in life. And why do you even think you're here? And I know it sounds all very philosophical, but at the end of the day, it's so important to realize who you are before you can actually have an impact on anybody in your life. And that was groundbreaking to me. And I always say to the students now, the first thing you need to do is work out who you are before you can give back to your family or conservation. You're just a much happier person if you make sure you're where you want to be. If you're in the wrong place, you need to change your career choice. You need to get out of situations that you're not happy to be in. And it's an amazing journey, because if anybody's unhappy, they're the only ones that are going to be able to do something about it.
I was going to ask you next, do you have any advice for someone that is coming into conservation? I feel like that was pretty good advice there, but I don't know if there's anything that you would want to add to that for, maybe a young potential student at the wildlife college. What would you give them as advice coming into this space and potentially having a career in the conservation world?
Yeah, my advice is honesty. It has to be a passion. Conservation is not just a job. It's you choose conservation because it's a calling. It's not something that you just decide, oh, let me try this and see if it works, because I can guarantee it's not going to work. If you don't have the passion for conservation, if it's not something you wanted to do all your life, go to the city and be a banker. Conservation is something, it's either in you or it's not. And we see many students, lovely people, come through the college and yes, they make great grades, but they don't have it in them to have a long-term career in conservation. And it's fine as a starting point and move on to something special. But if you believe you want a long-term career in conservation, make sure you have a passion for it. It doesn't pay well, but the extra zeros on your paycheck goes every single sunset that goes down every night. And when you hear the lion at night, it's people say, oh, it's a romantic view of conservation, but that's what it is. I mean, living in wildlife areas, you choose to be remote, you choose to be tranquil. It's a big choice. There are many, many challenges that you face, and there's definitely, it's not easy. But if you've got the passion, you'll get through just about anything.
It's great advice. Yeah, and I think the people too, it's just my experience getting to know people in the conservation world are some of the most amazing humans I've ever met, and just so devoted and dedicated to the work. And like you said, it has to be a passion. It's funny how similar it is to the creative world as well, like filmmaking or any kind of art. It's like you kind of tell people don't do this unless you're really passionate about it, because most likely you're going to be broke and struggling to try to make it happen. But if you really love it, then it's worth it because of all the other aspects of it that are payment in different ways, sunsets and lion roars in the conservation space. Maybe as a final question, why do you do this? Why do you keep doing it? You've been involved in conservation for so many years. You've had a lot of different positions at the Wildlife College. What gets you excited in the morning when you get up to do this work?
So that's a question many people have asked me. They've said, do you think that there's any future in conservation, and why are you still in it? And of course we do. If we didn't believe that we were making a difference, if we didn't believe we were changing this world to be a better place after we've moved on from what it was before we arrived, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So I really do believe, we don't have children. We are absolutely dedicated to conservation. And I believe my own personal life and the college life, the college will make this world a better place. Every single student that passes through those doors is a product of the college. I remember Mr. Rupert saying in a board meeting once to Peace Parks, give me one success story. And I said to him, I can give you about 1,000 a year. And every single student that goes through our college is a success story. And that's the reason why I do what I do, is because we make a difference. And I don't just say that, I mean it. And I believe personally and professionally, we make a difference, and that's what keeps us going. Yeah,
you guys have already made such a big difference in the world, and excited to see how you guys continue to do that over the years. And yeah, I just want to thank you for your time, Theresa. This has been really great chatting with you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the RHINO Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at RHINO Man the Movie. More details about RHINO Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who've dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for RHINO Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the RHINO Man podcast.